Good Monday afternoon. It is August 26, 2019, and we have a long video in store for you today. There's just a lot to talk about. We have our fourth named system out in the Atlantic, Tropical Storm Dorian, which has shown signs of strengthening since we last talked, and an overall tropical discussion because there's a few other disturbances that we're going to hit on as well. So here's a look at the big picture out in the Atlantic Basin. There isn't a ton going on in much of the basin, but you get into the main development region in the deep tropical Atlantic, it has spawned our first main development region system of the year, and that is Dorian right now. This is how it looks on infrared satellite imagery. We've talked about this numerous times. This sort of filter on the satellite lets us see the temperatures of the cloud tops. Why that is important is because the colder the cloud tops, the stronger the system is. And when we're seeing the whites and the blacks showing up there like we saw in the last 12 hours or so, those are signs of some very strong thunderstorm developing and a sign that it is strengthening. Overall, I just want to hit on this, the size of Dorian, 288 miles in diameter. Rather small. The average tropical system is around 300 miles, so just a little bit below average. But just for comparison, you ever wonder what the smallest system ever recorded? Well, can you imagine this? A 22-mile wide storm, Tropical Storm Marco, back in 2008. Of course, this was just at a certain point in its life that it was this small. It actually ended up being a Category 1 hurricane, but that was back in 2008. 22 miles in size comparison to 288 miles in terms of Dorian. The largest ever in the Atlantic Basin, the largest hurricane, that was Sandy back in 2012. It had a diameter of over 1,100 miles. It was a massive system out there, and you can see it for comparison with Dorian down into the almost heading into the Caribbean. Here's how it looks presently. It is heading towards the west, towards the Windward Islands, and is already impacting human life. In Barbados right now, that's the island you see right there, and we do have ground observations in Barbados. These are wind observations within the last couple of hours, up to very close to tropical storm force winds that would be 39 miles per hour or stronger. You see, right, we're almost there. We're at 38 miles per hour, and it's only going to get a little windier as we head through the next couple of hours. Overall, we had talked about how the dry air would be a hindrance on this developing and strengthening. It has actually developed a core that it has walled itself off from this dry air being entrained into the system and choking it off. You can see it's completely surrounded by all that dry air, which is the yellows and the rust color. Very moist, and especially when you look back 36 hours ago up to present, much more moist profile from surface height all the way up into the sky. I mean, very, very moist setup there. We have watches, we have warnings up for the Windward Islands. In the yellow, those are tropical storm watches down to the south Windward Islands, and these travel north out towards St. Lucia, of course, Barbados, under a tropical storm warning. We move a little farther to the north, Martinique under that tropical storm warning, and then you get out towards Dominica. I hope I said that right, but this is the island that took a direct hit by Hurricane Maria with 160-mile-per-hour sustained winds back in 2017. So hopefully they get not too much of an impact from this as it moves on through there. But certainly keep everybody in your thoughts as we go through the next 24 hours as Dorian moves on through there. And farther to the north, we're looking at tropical storm watches up towards Montserrat. And I can't even read what that means. St. Kitts and the islands out there south of or near Antigua and Barbuda. Overall, what does a watch and what does a warning mean? Good time to kind of reassess and look at what this means so you can know if it's for your area at any point. A watch is when a tropical storm or hurricane conditions are possible within 48 hours. A warning means hurricane threat is pretty imminent, and it's likely going to be coming on through within the next 36 hours or less. So where is Dorian going? Now, there are some changes here since we last talked yesterday, and it does keep Dorian as a stronger system, as a Category 1 hurricane, as it moves on through a portion of the Caribbean that's designated as the graveyard of tropical systems. However, this time around, the dry air, the wind shear, I don't think is really going to do a whole lot to the system, at least in the short term. And we're going to talk about in the medium range outlook here how things could get quite iffy one way or the other, depending on its exact track. We're going to get into that in just a second. But the overall cone of uncertainty that you saw there. You've heard that word time and again. And what exactly is it? Well, it's a forecast for the probable center of the storm and where it's going to be located and where it's projected to go within the next 5 days. Why don't we go out past 5 days? Why don't we go out to 7 or 10 days? Well, the farther out you get in time, the larger the error is possible. And that's why that cone grows in size the farther out in the future you go. In fact, that diameter, that radius gets up and over 250 miles. That center could be located anywhere within that. 5 days out, it's much, much smaller, closer to the future or the present time. So the storm center will remain in the track 2/3 of the time, but the cone itself does not indicate the size of the storm. You could have a beast of a storm like Sandy, like we just talked about. The center could be in this cone, but the effects are felt well outside of that cone. So a lot of times when we have a system threatening the U.S. or any landmass, somebody will say, you know, we're not in the cone of uncertainty and no need to worry. It's really not the case. You can have effects well outside of that cone. Here's how the computer models are seeing things. Each line you see here written on or drawn on this map is a different computer model, and we change the variables, tweak it a little bit to have a different outcome. Pretty good consistency and consensus within those, but this is the medium range I was talking about that really will depend miles worth of where it tracks on how its future kind of pans out. Because you see, this is Dominican Republic and Haiti here. Very, very mountainous. Notoriously, any landmass is detrimental to a hurricane, right? But mountainous landmasses are even worse because that'll shear and tear that entire storm apart. So if it does track over the Dominican Republic, it'll fall apart and we'll just have probably a remnant low and pieces of what Dorian was as it heads into the Bahamas. If it does track to the west of Puerto Rico and to the east of the Dominican Republic, small area, but it could happen because some of these models do forecast that, it could hold its structure together enough that we see a pretty formidable storm getting into the Bahamas, and then that would put in jeopardy the Florida East Coast and the southeastern part of the United States. Okay, so we have to watch it closely as we head into Labor Day weekend. Here's how it looks on visible satellite imagery, okay? The recent numbers on it are 60-mile-per-hour winds with gusts up to 70. We need 74-mile-per-hour sustained winds, so we need this number here to be 74 or greater for Dorian to become a hurricane. It is moving out towards the west-northwest now to around 14. That northerly shift in that direction, as it gains latitude, it'll actually start to spread out that wind field a little bit more. So the farther north it goes, that wind field gets a little bit larger. It looks pretty good here on the visible imagery. We have well-defined inflow and well-defined outflow, meaning the storm is breathing well, okay? It's holding off that dry air, and it's not pulling any of it in to its overall circulation, which is very, very interesting. Also pretty cool here, as we go all the way back in time and look at it as the sun was coming on up, we had the shadow, and if you look very closely, you can see the towering thunderstorm clouds here, getting that shadow in there early on, bubbling on up, showing some intensification there. In fact, I couldn't show it here, but some of the satellite imagery out there was showing that there was lightning detected near the central part of the system, and that is usually an indication of strengthening, and we've seen that pretty much. That bubbling up of the cloud deck, as I switch up the filter here and show you the infrared again. Again, this is the temperature of the clouds. Notice they were the coldest right at that early time when they were the highest in the sky. The whites and the blacks there moving off towards the west before they start to just some browns and some reds in that imagery there. We did have aircraft out in the system. One flight so far, and it was a NOAA Gulfstream that flew out of St. Croix, the U.S. Virgin Islands. Yesterday, it flew a circular pattern and it sampled the upper air conditions to give you a picture of what that actually looks like. This is a high-altitude flying jet, the Gulfstream. It deploys dropsondes. It takes a sampling of the overall atmosphere above the storm, and it helps to determine the intensity of it. The future of Dorian, water temperature is not a problem. It is like bathwater out here. We're looking at numbers in the mid-80s. You need minimal 80-degree waters. We have numbers in the mid-80s, and they only get warmer as you get closer to Dominican Republic and eventually into the Bahamas. Wind shear, that could be the one thing we really have to watch as we head into the next couple of days. This is the forecast wind shear. Anything you're seeing shaded here is higher wind shear that would help to tear it apart. We're not seeing much of it. However, as it gets a little bit closer to Dominican Republic, could encounter some slightly higher wind shear there. So we'll really have to watch that overall variable. On top of Dorian, still got Invest 98L. What does Invest mean? Investigative area. Just how we keep track of areas that we're watching out in the tropical Atlantic or really anywhere across the world. Invest 98 goes from 90 to 99, and then we go right back. We're recycled, only 9 in a row. And the L just means it's in the Atlantic Basin. 98L here has a really good chance of becoming Erin, the next name on the list, the 5th named storm of the season. 90% within the next 2 days. And possibly even by later today, we could have Erin out there. But the good news is, if you look at the computer models here, it stays well offshore, even well offshore from Bermuda, right in the middle of that in the eastern seaboard, as it heads possibly up into the Canadian Maritimes. Water temperatures here are pretty warm, so we could have some issues up there, but not for the short term, at least, as it moves off towards the northeast. If you have any questions, if you enjoy these videos, shoot me a message. You got a question or anything like that, you can find me on Facebook. Meteorologist Tim Pandagis. Also on Twitter, 13 Tim Pandagis. Don't forget to subscribe to this page and share it with your friends, and we'll see you again tomorrow.